Hi there. My name is Trevor Lightfoot. I'm lead pastor at All Saints Anglican Church in Bedford, and this is Storytime with Rev Trev. It's nice to welcome you back. I hope you've been enjoying the story. The story is coming from this book called How Winston Came Home for Christmas, and I'm reading one chapter of this book each day in Advent. It's actually designed for that, so that's great. And it's a story about a mouse who's on an adventure trying to, if we've come to a point now of understanding, trying to find his mum. And he was shipped from Paris to Germany, where he's at now. And if we recall, he ended up sort of being accidentally kicked in the little container he's being transported into a dark corner, and the last thing we heard were about two yellow beady eyes looking out at him. So we begin today a new chapter. This is December the 10th, which means it's the 10th day of Advent, and the chapter is entitled Don't Eat Me. The glowing amber eyes were joined by a long orange and black nose. Winston squeaked, stumbled on the slippery floor, and fell backwards as the face of a fox loomed over him. Winston and the fox looked at each other for a moment, and then, at the same time, they cried, "Don't eat me!" and leaped away from each other. It took Winston a moment to realize what had just happened. "Me?" he said, too bewildered by the idea to be frightened. "Eat you?" The fox in the shadows looked at Winston from under a trembling paw. "Yes," he said, "you might gobble me up." Winston couldn't help himself. He started to giggle. "I wouldn't gobble you up," he laughed. "Are you sure?" asked the fox suspiciously. Winston nodded. "Absolutely sure. I don't think mice eat foxes. I don't, anyways. I much prefer cake." He picked up some of the split cake from his traveling box and held it out to share. The fox took it hungrily, but continued to look at Winston with large, worried eyes. Winston tidied his scarf, then stuck out a paw. "I'm Winston," he said. The fox gingerly shook Winston's paw. "I'm Heinz. Heinz Schmuggerlig. If you aren't going to eat me, what are you doing here?" Winston slumped down on the edge of the new crumpled macaroon box and told the fox everything. All about his journey from Mistletoe Street to Paris, then to Germany. "You did all that?" gasped Heinz. "That's very brave." Winston wasn't sure if it was really. "Well, maybe," he said, "but you see, I know I just have to solve my very curious mystery. I'm hoping someone here will help me." But he thought sadly. That seemed a long way off now. The parcels from the train had long since vanished into the crowd, and with it Winston's chance of being delivered to where he needed to be. He was completely lost. "Well," said Heinz, "I think it's very brave. I wouldn't be able to do any of that. I'm not a very brave sort of fox. I live here behind these bins and only sneak out when people aren't looking. The world is a bit too big for me. Big and scary. And I worry about things a lot." Winston rubbed his nose for a moment, thinking. Heinz was obviously all alone in the world, and Winston knew how that felt. Before he'd met Oliver, he'd also been all alone. Winston knew what it was like to sneak about in the shadows, because that had been his life too. If his adventures had told him anything, it was that the world was big, yes, but it was also full of kindness, and especially at Christmas, when the air was full of magic. Winston decided then that he wanted to help Hines. He wanted to help him be braver and to see the magic fizzing around him. Suddenly he had an idea. "I need to find a library," said Winston. "I don't suppose you know where it is, do you? It's an enormous, old one, full of hundreds and hundreds of books." "Oh, yes, I know where lots of places are," said Hines eagerly, "even though I haven't actually been to them. Look." He pointed to the tatty cardboard box he slept in, under a blanket of crumpled maps dropped by people who visited the nearby tourist office. "I study them when I can't sleep at night. They have all the important places in town on them. I can't read the words yet, but I can read the pictures." "Do you think you could take me to the library?" said Winston, "and I can show you just how magical Christmas is on the way?" Hines didn't look very sure. "We won't be gobbled up, will we?" Winston put his paws on his hips and stood heroically. "Fear not," he cried. "I will gobble up anyone who even thinks about eating you. I promise." And he crossed his heart and tried to look as brave and majestic as possible. With cars hooting and people bustling about, Winston could see why Hines could be frightened. But, just as he predicted, the air was also full of winter magic. It was much colder here than in Paris, and Winston was glad that he had Hines's warm fur to nestle into. He sat up by his ears and leaning forward to reassure him and point things out to his new friend. He showed him the sparkling ice on the branches of tall, decorated Christmas trees, and how shop windows glowed like lanterns, painting the cold pavements outside with dazzling yellows and oranges. As they waited to cross the road, Winston showed Hines how to throw back his head to catch enormous fluffy snowflakes on his tongue. It wasn't long before Winston noticed that a sparkle had crept into his eye. "See," he said, "magic is everywhere. You just have to look for it." As the night set in, the city began to twinkle with thousands of new flickering lights. "We're almost there, I think," said Hines. They turned the corner and found themselves in a wide square, across which the library loomed. But the square was far from empty. Winston's whiskers wobbled and his belly rumbled as they sniffed the hundreds of smells sizzling in the air from the enormous market in front of him. Winston was just about to suggest they took a little tiny trip to look at some of the stalls and maybe have a little tiny nibble or some food, when a movement caught his eye. A bemitten woman was standing at the half-open library door, fumbling in her handbag for a key. "Oh no," cried Hines. "She's shutting the place up." The door seemed to be the only entrance. If it got locked up tight, the answer to Winston's very curious mystery would be locked up inside with it. "We have to get in," said Winston. "But how?" Just then, a crowd of children playing in the snow tumbled into view. They were in a very giddy spirit, and Winston watched as one of them, a cheeky-faced scallywag, rolled up a snowball and hurled it at the library. It splattered against the door just above the librarian's head. She spun around and frowned sternly. Her eyes narrowed. The children stopped still and held their breaths. Winston held his, too. The children were in for a terrific telling off. He just knew it. But then, to everyone's surprise, the librarian grinned. She swooped down, scrambled about in the snow, and made a gigantic snowball of her own. The open door to the library behind her was quite forgotten as she patted her icy grenade and took aim. "Quick!" squeaked Winston, and like a flash Hines dashed to the door, just as the librarian fired her snowy missile at the hooting children. A moment later the door closed with a heavy clunk, and Hines and Winston found themselves locked inside the deserted library. And that's the end of today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed that. We now know Winston's inside the library, and that's where he wanted to be in hopes of finding out his very mysterious Christmas mystery. And we also encountered a new person in our story, Hines. And there's the picture of Hines there. And you can see his ratty old box right in behind him. And then, of course, we also have a picture of the lady with her snowball all ready to throw it away. So there we are, and in the story we heard how Winston helped someone overcome some fears and help them along in their own life journey. And that can be the same for us as well as we go along. Sometimes we just need some encouragement to take another step or to move forward. And so I hope and pray that we can help others do that in their lives, and that we're open to allowing others to help us in our lives. Into tomorrow, I hope that you have a very enjoyable day, a very restful night, and we'll see you tomorrow. God bless.